know who these people are. Because as you said, a lot of these people, they say they're taking time off work to protest. I bet you a lot of them are calling in sick. I bet you a lot of their employers don't know what they're doing. But we're going to make sure everybody knows who they are. We're going to broadcast. They want to broadcast the ICE officer that was nearly killed all over the internet. We're going to broadcast every one of these people we arrest. This job and these people who want to say follow ICE, and film ICE, you know what? You can protest. They have that right. But when you cross that line, and we've proven it, if you interfere or impede or assault an ICE officer, you will be prosecuted. And one thing I'm pushing for right now, Laura, we're going to create a database where those people that are arrested for interference, impediment, assault, we're going to make them famous. We're going to put their face on TV. We're going to let their employers in their neighborhoods, in their schools, know who these people are. Because as you said, a lot of these people, they say they're taking time off work to protest. I bet you a lot of them are calling in sick. I bet you a lot of their employers don't know what they're doing. But we're
I know you just talked to a high-placed source at DOJ. Tell us more.
Yeah, so he wasn't arrested last night. He could have been, but the Minneapolis police didn't bother chasing the vehicle that had just stolen a high-powered rifle out of an FBI car. So that stole it out of one of these weapons lockers that was in the back. But what I can confirm now is that Raul Gutierrez, age 33, that you see in the video that I posted last night, stealing a firearm from an FBI vehicle, has been arrested by the ATF and the DOJ. They executed an arrest warrant today, and he's a known member of the Latin Kings gang. I just got all this information just before I came on air. He's got a lengthy, violent rap sheet. Of course, he should have been in prison already, but in Tim Waltz, Minnesota, like they don't arrest anybody here. So it's not surprising that he was able to go out and beat this gun safe to a pulp and pull this automatic firearm out of it and run away with it. And, hell, if it wasn't for, honestly, a lot of us independent journalists on the ground that were able to get a video of this, nobody would have seen it happen.
Wouldn't know about it.
They were able to find this guy based on a video from independent journalists, the one that we posted last night. I mean, it's crazy that it has to be us doing this.
So, Nick, did you talk to DOJ to get his name?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I've been in contact with Attorney General Pam Bondi throughout the day today. We've talked to them several times.
We'll take that as a
lot more material that I haven't posted. Yeah, and so they've been there's a lot of FBI stuff going on the ground right now that I can't talk about, but there's more coming.
Patriots, hold the line! You ain't a patriot, I'm a combat veteran. You worthless excuse for a move! You're not the biggest case of fault. It's in the Stop taking my fucking Fuck up, you fucking coward!
What I can tell you for certain is that this is not sustainable. This is an impossible situation that our city is presently being put in. And at the same time, we are trying to find a way forward to keep people safe, to protect our neighbors, to maintain order. And we're in a position right now where we have residents that are asking the very limited number of police officers that we have to fight ICE agents on the street, to stand by their neighbors. We cannot be at a place right now in America where we have two governmental entities that are literally fighting one another.
I'm not resisting. What are you doing? You're under arrest for making
No, I never said a threat. I never said anything. I never said anything. I never said anything.
You got her, man. Hey.
Back up. All right.
I want you to let me go.
Let's go. You can record. Let's back up. Thank you.
I will if you let me go. I'm not resisting.
You're under arrest for making
No, I never said a threat. I never said anything. I never said anything. I never said anything.
You got her, man. Hey.
We don't need to hold back anymore. We see your fucking truth. If you're gonna come out and shoot us, we're gonna come back and shoot you.
Did you just threaten the federal agent?
They came out and shot a fucking lady.
Did you just
I don't
threaten
give
a
a fuck.
federal officer? It's on camera if you guys
If you
need
guys
it.
want to choose the Civil War,
Doesn't
you'll
matter.
fucking get one. Just wait. It's not gonna be me who starts it.
I would refrain from threatening them. Kind of your best move.
I have a First Amendment right to say whatever the fuck I want. I have a First Amendment right to say whatever the fuck I want. And I have a Second Amendment right to bear the fucking arms.
Not to threaten.
I can say what the fuck I want.
That's a difference.
If they want to bust out that front door and threaten us like that, fuck you guys.
Because you went through their property.
Fuck your property. Fuck your bullshit. Fuck all your bullshit. Fuck your legal terms. Fuck your following the fucking sheep type thing.
Smash that like and follow.
This is Savannah Hernandez outside of the Queens Criminal Courthouse in New York City, where I just attended the sentencing for Charles Foner, the 67-year-old retiree who was just sentenced to 4 years in prison after defending himself from a 15-time career criminal here in New York City. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of Charles, basically back in 2023, a 15-time career criminal with a history of mental illness ended up threatening him and lunging at him. Charles, who had a handgun in his pocket, which he had, by the way, because of his fears of rising crime throughout the city, ended up pulling out his weapon, telling this man to stop. He did not heed the warning. He continued to lunge at Charles. Charles opened fire and ended up killing him. Now, interesting thing about this case is that the DA of Queens, Melinda Katz, did not bring forth homicide or manslaughter charges because even her office agreed that this was a clear-cut case of self-defense. However, what they did decide to charge Charles for was criminal possession of a weapon, and then after this incident happened, the police went and searched his home, and they found what they stated is an arsenal of unlicensed weapons. Now, I want to say he had about 30 other guns in his home, and Charles's attorney stated that Charles has been shooting guns since he was a kid. Charles has no criminal history, and he has been around guns his entire life. However, because he was in New York and these were unlicensed, the DA decided to bring forward these charges. Now, something else I want to bring up is there was a case that was very similar to what happened to Charles with a 69-year-old homeless man on a subway in New York who ended up killing somebody in self-defense. Now, this homeless man ended up getting attacked by 5 illegal immigrants, and he used a knife to fight off his attackers, and he ended up stabbing and killing one. Again, Melinda Katz's office decided that this was a clear-cut case of self-defense and decided not to press any charges at all, and that case has since been dropped. Very similar to Charles's case, the main difference here, though, is, of course, the weapon used. Instead of using a gun to defend himself from criminals, this homeless man used a knife, and the DA did not bring forward those charges. So I spoke to Charles's attorney, who was present today, who stated that this is one of the saddest cases that he's ever worked on. To understand how this has impacted Charles, here's what he had to say.
I don't think justice was served on the macro level. You know, we've said consistently our position is that Charlie is not without fault. He possessed firearms that he wasn't lawfully allowed to possess. The question is one of proportionality. Prosecutors have essentially absolute discretion in these situations. They exercised some of that discretion to give Charlie a sentence that was less than what he would have faced at trial. they exercised some of that discretion in ultimately not charging you with homicide. But the question is whether the ultimate sentence was proportional, whether it was necessary to send someone of Charlie's age, given his lack of history of any violence, the impeccable life he's led, to an upstate prison sentence where we continue in this city and other cities throughout the United States watch recidivist violent offenders given second, third, fourth, fifth chances from the criminal justice system. And in Charlie's case, he was not a person of means. He's lived a very middle-class, working-class lifestyle. As a result of this prosecution, he's had to sell the home that him and his wife had strived for years to finally own. His Social Security benefits, which really, given his age, make up a disproportionate amount of whatever income he has in retirement, will stop while he's in prison. And of course, as I alluded to before, there's the psychological, emotional, mental impact, the separation from family. I've been practicing law and criminal law for 25 years. I've tried cases in Iraq in a courtroom where there were explosive devices going off outside the courtroom. I have never, as a military veteran, I've never seen or been part of a case as sad and as tragic as this one.
Now, the judge in this case stated that Americans have been very vocal about this case, calling her office, leaving voicemails, sending in emails on behalf of Charles. However, she highlighted how she was not responsible for the charges brought forward in this case. Again, that rested with the DA and her office. And basically, they had Charles choose between a trial by jury and up to 25 years in prison for these unlicensed handguns and criminal possession of a weapon, or he could take this plea deal for a minimum of 5 years in prison that his attorney actually negotiated down to 4. So he was officially sentenced today. He is now in custody, going to be spending 4 years in a state prison after defending himself from a career criminal here in New York City. And one of the most memorable arguments that his attorney brought forward today in these closing statements was that perhaps Charles would not even have had the opportunity to be on the stand today if he didn't have his gun to protect himself. Perhaps it would have been Cody Gonzalez, his assailant with 15 prior arrests and a history of mental illness, who would have been here instead. So an idea of what crime is looking like in New York City, what self-defense is looking like in New York City, and of course what gun rights look like in New York City.
Imagine if that city or that town was suddenly invaded by thousands of federal agents that do not share the values that you hold dear. Imagine if your daily routines were disrupted. The local cafe that you eat at was shut down because they're scared that their own family might get torn apart. Imagine if schools shut down and suddenly parents got to figure out what to do for daycare.
Undocumented immigrants have been detained or transferred to.
Well, I don't call them undocumented immigrants. I call them illegal immigrants because that's what they are. The reason they're not documented is they're not legal, okay? They're illegal immigrants. 74% of the illegal immigrants that we've detained have had criminal charges against them, okay? The other 26% were riding with them, okay? So when we stop a car, we run a warrants check on everybody in the car. When there's a call for service, we run a warrants check on the victim, the suspect, and all the witnesses, okay? We call that 26% collateral. But 3 out of 4 of them have committed another criminal charge. Now think about that for a second. They couldn't commit that crime if they weren't here, but they did. So now you're having to take your taxpayer money and my taxpayer money and pay for the prosecution of those folks, pay for the public defender that defends them, pay for the jail and the prison sentence depending on what the charges are. So and the majority of the 26% that was left out of the 74% of them had criminal charges. They were what we call collaterals, and most of them were with the person committing the crime. And that's the numbers that we have so far. And those, so how many illegal immigrants have we arrested this year? We've arrested 557 that have criminal charges as well as they're here illegally. That's just this year. But here's the thing that, and let me focus on this, and I know on social media people have already tuned out, but you need to tune back in and listen to this. The reason that you see ICE flooding into Minnesota and Minneapolis and into Los Angeles, into these big cities, is because they refuse to turn over the illegal immigrants who are being arrested by the local police department where there's outstanding ICE warrants. If they would have simply, instead of fighting back and pushing back against the federal government, instead of violating the federal law, which is what these leaders have done there, if they just said, look, ICE, we don't want our police actively engaged in ICE enforcement, but you can come in our jails, and as we make arrests, you can go through your evaluation process and remove those criminals that are committing crime against the citizens of the United States and against each other. You can remove them. Then they wouldn't be flooding these big blue areas with all of these ICE agents. So it's the policy and the laws that the California and the Illinois and the Minnesota and the Oregons and the Portlands and the city, it's the laws that they've passed that's created the environment for ICE to have to go in there and do it all on their own. And it puts the ICE agents at additional risk. The local law enforcement officers have already taken the risk to arrest these people. They're in custody. They're locked up. They're in a county lockup or a city lockup someplace, or a state lockup for their causes. But yet they're telling the city, the county, or the state prison system, turn these illegals that have committed crime back out into the community on our people. And so if ICE can't get help from the state and the local folks, then they have to send more resources in order to do the job. All of this could have been avoided. All of this could have been. You don't see that happening in Florida. You don't see ICE sending 1,000 people down here to go into Miami or Jacksonville or Tampa or Orlando or our big metro areas. You don't see that. You know why? Because we're cooperating. And this same environment could be in every one of those states if the state had cooperated. But instead, you've elected a bunch of people there, governors primarily, House and Senate members, mayors, city commissioners, county commissioners, that said, hey, we're going to let these criminals that are here illegally committing crime against the people of the state of California or Minnesota or wherever, we're going to allow them to come back out into the community and commit more crime against you rather than turn them over to our federal partners. That's why you're seeing all this scrum all over the nation. That's why you're seeing it. If they were cooperating like Florida was cooperating, there would not be the protest. There would not be the conflict. People wouldn't be angry. They wouldn't be going to businesses because they would be caught up like they are in Florida when they're committing crime and we turn them over to ICE. They're already caught and they're out of the country. That's why you're seeing this. It's created by the law and the practice and the policy of the elected officials at the state level, the county level, and the city level, telling them to oppose federal law. Now, why in the world you want those people in those positions that think it's all right to oppose the law? that think more of the criminals than they do the suspects? I don't know. That's why we call this the free state of Florida, because we're for the people. They're for the criminals.
Sheriff, what's the
Well, there's a lot going on tonight around the world, certainly here in the United States, but foreign policy has got to be the headline tonight. And in order, here's what's happening. We're awaiting what look like imminent strikes on Iran. Have no idea actually whether those will happen or not, but all signs indicate something is coming, and certainly momentum is in that direction, and events tend to follow momentum almost independently of the judgment of people who are in charge. So it looks like we will be striking Iran or doing something there, A. B, it looks like the United States will be taking Greenland from Denmark, which sort of owns it. There are pictures this afternoon of a kind of sad-looking Danish president or king or emir or potentate or whatever, whoever runs Denmark. Oh, how the Scandinavians have been diminished. Leaving the White House looking kind of sad. So looks like the news has been delivered to him. Sorry, no more Denmark for you. Nuuk is now an American protectorate. And then, of course, there's Venezuela. Venezuela, as you well know, was changed. It was regime changed, sort of, shortly after New Year's by the Trump administration. And the then leader, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife were extradited, some say kidnapped, and moved to New York. They'll be put on trial, we are told. And so there's that. And that country and the rest of the world are trying to figure out, like, what are the implications of this and what happens to Venezuela next? You have those top three. And, of course, you pray sincerely and you hope, and sometimes you tell yourself that everything's going to be completely fine, and it may be completely fine, by the way. We don't know any differently. But you also assess downside risk. What are the potential downside risks? Without getting into too much detail, of course, they exist. There's downside risk in every human action. And in the case of a strike on Iran, you know, the country could fall apart and become Libya, which is kind of a big deal, given its geographic location, given its energy reserves, and given the region. You could see Iran strike out at Israel, for example.
Now, some people have said that the Iran strike has been put on hold due to Israel's request in order to prepare for counterstrikes. Anybody that's listening to this, if you've heard the same thing, let me know. And let me know what you think about this. That it looks like we are going to strike Iran again. It's just a matter of when. So let me know what you think. Actually, I'll go ahead and put while we're playing this, I'll put a poll in the chat.
To such an extent with conventional weapons that the Iron Dome, the fabled Iron Dome, does not protect Israel's two largest cities, and a lot of Israelis get killed.
Alfredo.
You can see that for sure. That's not a crazy thing to worry about. You could also see attacks against energy infrastructure in the Gulf right across the water from Iran. The 6 Gulf countries that produce a lot of the world's energy, oil and gas, and you could see those taken out. That's possible. They have air defenses in their energy facilities, but how good are they? We don't know. We could find out. And if that happened, you would see an oil shock, which would lead to a global economic shock of unknown proportions, but that's never good. In Greenland, what are the downsides of taking Greenland? Well, you establish a precedent that if I have the power, I get to take what I want. That's always been enforced. That's human nature. We've constructed a kind of elaborate series of rules, theoretical rules, designed to pretend that's not true and to mitigate it to some extent over the last 80 years. But really, that's always been true and always will be true. But that's a pretty tough game. Once you write the rules that if someone can take something because they want it, it's okay, you have to live with them. NATO will effectively be done. How can you have a defensive alliance when one member acts against another? Probably can't. NATO was going out anyway. Is it really bad that NATO is going away? No, it's a huge victory for the world and for the United States. But it's going to be tough for its many employees and for the entire infrastructure of foreign policy thinkers, such as they are in Washington and
we
Brussels
do not need
and
them.
throughout Europe. They're going to have to face the reality that this is not a real thing anymore. If NATO was real, then the U.S. wouldn't have taken Greenland. So there's that, apparently a downside. And then in Venezuela, the downside is obvious. You could have chaos. You could have a black hole. You could have a migrant crisis. Once again, the energy infrastructure could be destroyed. You could see a move against the government that we effectively left in place. Sort of weird to think that a lot of people in Washington are rooting for Delcy Rodriguez, apparently the head of state now, who's a acolyte of Hugo Chavez, but she also represents stability. And at this point, stability is what people want most. So those are the kinds of things that people who think about this stuff for a minute are concerned about. Maybe not panicked, but definitely concerned. But none of those concerns comes even close to what's happening in Eastern Europe, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. Russia, and prepare yourselves because this is the global headline, Russia is actively considering the use of nuclear weapons against Europe. Not against Kiev, against Europe. Specifically, the UK and Germany. Just taking out the UK and Germany with nuclear weapons. That's a fact. Now, we're going to explain why we know that that's true in a moment. And at the end of this open, we're going to play an interview we did a few hours ago with a man called Sergei Karnagov, who is a longtime political advisor to Vladimir Putin and one of the most famous public intellectuals in Russia, been around for about 35 years, advised Boris Yeltsin, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And in that interview, he says point blank, yes, if the Ukraine war continues at this tempo for a year or two more, we, speaking apparently on behalf of the Russian government, on behalf of his friend Putin, or at least someone who's very familiar with President Putin's thinking, we, Russia, will eliminate the UK and Germany with nuclear weapons. Now, that's a headline. No one wants to see Qatari gas wellheads blown up. No one wants to see killing of any kind or destruction of any kind. But taking out the two most important countries in Europe, both of which have big American bases, lots of American personnel, of course, international banking, Germany being the economic engine of Europe, London being the banking center of Europe, of the West, along with New York. And of course, these are two ancient countries with which we have close ties, history and kinship and genetics. We're going to take them out. We're going to eliminate those countries with nuclear weapons, saying that right into camera. So that's a pretty big story. Have you read that story? Has anyone mentioned that to you? That the most famous public intellectual in Russia, a close friend of Vladimir Putin's, exactly the same age, the two were born a month apart, have known each other a long time, is saying in public that Russia plans to use nuclear weapons against Western Europe. Russia is going to blow up the UK and Germany if things don't get resolved soon. You probably haven't heard that. It hasn't actually been on the front page of the New York Times. I don't think the Times of London has mentioned it. No one seems to be paying any attention at all to the biggest story of our lifetimes, potentially. And that's very odd. And it's not just one guy who's friends with Putin who's saying this. If you watch carefully, or not even carefully, with one eye open at what Russia's been doing recently, things are changing. So Russia has publicly rewritten its nuclear strategy to include use of nuclear weapons against countries that are acting as proxies for nuclear armed powers. Now, this is kind of classic Russian bureaucratic talk, but it means that under Russian law, Russia is permitted to, by its own rules, blow up Germany, even though Germany does not have nuclear weapons. The UK supposedly does. I wonder whose hands they're in. But Germany does not have nuclear weapons, and Russia has just said, no, you're fair game for a nuclear strike. And not a defensive nuclear strike, like you launched us, we're going to launch against you. No. You keep poking us in the face and we're going to eliminate you. Said that publicly. And then last week, a week ago, I think a week ago today, Russia sent hypersonic missiles into Kiev, Ukraine. Now, the hypersonic missiles killed probably 4 people. This was not an attack designed to destroy important infrastructure or to cause massive civilian casualties. This was an attack designed as a message, and the Russians just said this point blank. This was an attack designed to say, whoa, you've pushed us too far. We feel like our core interests, our existential interests are threatened. And if you don't back off, the next hypersonic missile we send, against which no country has any meaningful defense, you can't stop a hypersonic missile. No one has even claimed that you can. The next one will have a nuclear warhead on it, and it's coming at you, Europe.
This is the scary part of the people that are in charge of these Western countries right now, is that they're nihilists. They seem to not have any thought process at all of their own destruction. And so the nihilism and the arrogance of them is going to get a lot of people killed, because sooner or later they're going to push Putin to a point where he is going to potentially use nuclear weapons, because if you box them into a corner, then, things can get really bad. And, this is another one where, Trump said he was going to stop wars when he got in, and this is one of them that he was going to end right away, and it hasn't happened.
So let's just think this through for a sec. Why would Russia, which is supposedly in this bitter war against Ukraine, being backstopped by NATO and the U.S., et cetera, but they're fighting Ukraine over territory, why would Russia be threatening Europe? Because the Russians, whatever their faults, don't lie to themselves as aggressively as we do. And the Russians are saying out loud what is absolutely true about this war, which is it's a proxy war. It is not a war between Russia and Ukraine, and it never has been. And nothing that's happened in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union 35 years ago has really been about Ukraine. There has been a global scramble to control Ukraine, its land, its resources. There are other reasons people want to control Ukraine that are not directly related to land or resources that have to do with history. But in any case, non-Ukrainians have been calling the shots in Ukraine for 35 years. That's what Maidan was. That's what the coup, the U.S.-backed coup was. None of this had anything to do with Ukraine. What's best for Ukraine? We're going to make Ukraine a sovereign nation. The opposite has happened. Ukraine has less sovereignty. Ukraine is more of a puppet, and Ukraine has suffered more than maybe any country on earth over the last 4 years. Now, why? Well, we'll get into that. So the new year is here, but that does not mean you've got to overhaul your... In Ukraine, who himself is... Now, you will see and you will recognize immediately the Hungarian man on the left. That would be Mr. George Soros, one of the world's most successful financiers. I think, as he's euphemistically described, a guy who's bet against national currencies, really done nothing to make the world a better place or to improve the lives of individuals, has only sown chaos and hatred and violence, really for the length of his professional life, for whatever reason, whatever motive might be animating him. He is on the left. On the right is a woman called Chrystia Freeland. Now, she's not Ukrainian either. She's from Canada. She's from Alberta, Canada. She spent the bulk of her career as a journalist working for Reuters and other news organizations like that, both in London and in Washington, where we spent quite a bit of time with her. And then she became the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada under Justin Trudeau. And an economic poobah. And if you're interested in how well she did, well, you can just look up facts about the current state of the Canadian economy. Not very well. But here's the interesting thing. Just recently, Chrystia Freeland, who again is not a product of, she didn't grow up in Ukraine. She grew up in Canada and lived in London and Washington. Chrystia Freeland is somehow working for unelected President Zelensky in Ukraine, who himself is not really that Ukrainian. Grew up speaking Russian. He's a citizen of the world like she is. like they all are. But she's now an unpaid economic advisor to Ukraine. Unpaid. Right. Okay. They're divvying up the natural resources of a country they know will soon collapse, with no regard for the people who've been killed, of course. But here is Chrystia Freeland and George Soros 10 years ago talking about Ukraine, and in so doing, giving the game away. Watch this.
Yeah, and I will just offer my own personal testimony here. It's actually amazing in Ukraine, the new Ukrainian government, the new Ukrainian leadership. Everyone who I know in that group has been touched somehow by open society and by George, like literally. Either people personally got a scholarship or someone, their wife got a scholarship. It's a really remarkable thing.
Well, this was, for me, quite an experience to see this. And I didn't realize, actually, how big an effect it has had over a 25-year period, because those were students.
By the way, I'm telling you, I've seen this guy like last year or the year before, and I think it was in Davos, and the guy could barely talk. I thought it was like nearing the end, like he's so old, and now all of a sudden this guy's like went back at 10 years in age somehow. He's probably drinking baby's blood, I'm sure, or whatever that chemical thing is. But it's crazy to see this dude like actually talking somewhat coherently when he wasn't able to talk before.
25 years later, they were leaders.
Probably was cloned.
Everybody she knows in Ukrainian leadership, says Chrystia Freeland, everybody has taken money from George Soros, or their wives have taken money from George Soros. Everyone running the country is actually employed by this Hungarian billionaire who's got nothing to do with the country. Oh, no one would admit that now. That's a conspiracy theory. But George Soros smiled and took credit for it. Of course, we had no idea how successful we were. Successful at what? What was the plan here? You put everybody in a country's leadership on your payroll to what end? What were you trying to achieve? Well, I guess we could debate what Soros's motives were at the time, but we don't need to, because as we know, the purpose of a system is its outcome. Over time, we don't have to guess about why certain people or certain organizations exist. We can instead look at what they do. We can judge the tree by its fruit. And the current state of Ukraine was clearly the point all along. Destroy the country, depopulate it, change the laws that prevent foreigners from buying its natural resources. Its land, some of the most fertile farmland in the world, huge tracts of it. It's an enormous country. It's the biggest country in Europe. Also the weakest and the most corrupt. Many people doing this had ancestors in Ukraine. So there very much is a sense that, wait a second, this is ours too. Chrystia Freeland had ancestors from Ukraine. A lot of people involved in making policy about Ukraine had ancestors in Ukraine. And so there is a kind of entitlement that you see on display. No, this is an interest. Of course, we have a right to weigh in on this. But not for the benefit of the Ukrainians. Really, all of this is about taking what once belonged to the country they claim they loved and using that country in order to defeat its much larger neighbor, which is the real prize, Russia. And this has been true for over 100 years, for hundreds of years. How many times have Europeans tried to invade Russia? A few. Napoleon tried. Why does everyone want to invade Russia? It's far away. It's freezing. No one ever succeeds in doing it. It's like Afghanistan or Yemen. Not a long track record of victory of outside forces taking control. There are a few peoples around the world that are tough to beat, history suggests. And the Russians are at the top of that list. So why do people keep trying? Well, in a word, resources. That's why. Russia is unimaginably large, literally unimaginably. Most people in the West haven't imagined how large Russia is. Russia is larger than China and India put together. You combine the landmass of China, so big you can barely get your head around it, and India, almost as big, and together they're smaller than Russia. Siberia itself is about the size of the continental United States, and there are like 10 million people living there. In all of Russia, there are about 140 million, something like that, in all of Russia. Meanwhile, Russia has the deepest energy reserves in the world, some of the highest uranium enrichment in the world. It has, by some measures, the most gold in the world, silver, bauxite for aluminum, timber, by far the largest timber reserves in the world, which people still need, by the way. Pulp for paper, dimensional lumber for building, people still need trees. And Russia has more than any other place, primarily in Siberia, but not just in Siberia. And of course, farmland and agricultural products, fertilizer, wheat. Russia has as much or more than anyone and very few people. So the promise of access to Russian resources and space and land has been a siren that has called invaders for centuries. And no judgment, by the way, you can see why. If Greenland is a prize, what is Russia? The biggest prize of all. And you saw this attitude on display the moment the wall fell. And rapacious foreigners, mostly bankers, moved into Russia and stripped it. And they were helped along by a lot of unscrupulous indigenous Russians. It wasn't just outsiders who did it. Some Russian oligarchs did it to their own people. But the fact is, a small group of people denuded the country, looted it. And unfortunately, this always plays out in exactly the same way. It's not enough to loot. You have to take everything and drive everyone else into despair, hopelessness, and poverty. And that's exactly what happened. When we started this company, we promised that we would only partner with other companies. We brought them to his side. You can't Bhutan, really poor and divided and sad and defeated, and alcoholism and drug use and gasoline huffing and suicide were endemic. And who did that? Well, the Russians to some extent did it to themselves. You know, they were living in this Soviet system for 70 years. But outsiders did it to them too. That's a fact. And whatever you think of Putin, he's bad. Putin got that under control. And Russia in 2026 bears no resemblance whatsoever to Russia in 2000, the year Putin took over. And one of the main changes he made is he kicked the money changers out of the temple. He did. Sorry. Everyone else has forgotten that, ignores it. He kicked the oligarchs out, or he brought them to his side. You can't act independently of the national interest. Sure, you can become a billionaire, but some of it has to go to the country. And that was spun in the West as cartel behavior. He's the mafia boss. Okay, fine. He's the mafia boss. But the real answer to the question, did it work or not, is obvious not just in the numbers, but in the state of the country, the visible state of the country now versus 25 years ago. It's a completely different place. It's no longer Bhutan. It's not Africa.
That's actually really an important point because, you know, for a long time, I'm trying to figure out what is it about Russia that the United States has such a problem with. And you know who's running the country in the United States. It's these oligarchs, these billionaires. They're the ones. And then all of this other stuff is really a distraction. And the billionaires are the ones that are paying for all of the stuff that's going on with the riots and everything else. So this is, you know, definitely a very important point that he's bringing up.
By some measures, it's much richer than any country in Western Europe. In fact, by every measure it is. By every single measure. Is it richer than Spain? Is it richer than the UK? Oh yeah, much. So that is both tempting to elites from around the world. Wait a second. Why do 140 million Russians get all this stuff? We should have some too. But it is also an indictment of their leadership. If you're Boris Johnson and your ancestors ruled the waves, ruled the British Empire, and your country is a kind of sad Urdu-speaking museum now, that's insulting. Really, the Russians? Those weird half-Slavic... I mean, they dominate world chess, but, like, really? They're not really white, and how are they doing so well? This is outrageous. It is an indictment of your own leadership, and in countries across Europe, the leaders feel that way. Russia is an embarrassment to them because it is, relatively speaking, thriving. And so they all, as one, backed the Biden administration's plan to have a war with Russia. And let's stop lying. This was not an unprovoked invasion. Putin just randomly went over the line into eastern Ukraine and stole these oblasts. He stole this land that belonged to another people. That's a total lie. And it's not a defense of Putin to call it out as a lie, because it is. And everybody knows it now. The truth is that in 2001, Putin, same guy, same leader, asked the Bush administration in person, directly to George W. Bush, I would like to join NATO. I would like to join the defensive alliance that exists to keep me from moving west into Western Europe. In other words, you won. I'm joining your team. And due in part to his own limitations as a leader, and due in part to the counsel that he received from Condoleezza Rice at the time, George W. Bush turned down that offer and prevented Russia from joining NATO. And the guest we're going to speak to in a moment, if you're wondering if he has a good track record of calling future events, said at the time, this decision to turn down Vladimir Putin, this is 25 years ago, Vladimir Putin's request to join NATO, to join the West, to all be in it together, to work together. This decision made by the Bush administration guarantees a collision with the West. We are now on a collision course. And of course, he was absolutely right, because NATO didn't want...
Tucker Carlson actually brought this up, or this was mentioned when Tucker Carlson went to Russia and personally interviewed Vladimir Putin. This decision by Bush pissed him. You could tell that Putin was pissed when he said, hey, look, why don't we work together? And, of course, you could picture the arrogance and the stupidity of George Bush essentially saying no. And, he obviously also made the mistake, too, in getting us into the Iraq War. And he had a Freudian slip after that, too. And, based on his decisions, could it possibly be getting us into a nuclear war, or very close to one?
Russia, because NATO wanted a war with Russia, and boy, they got it. And so from 2001 all the way to 2022, 21 years, NATO moved inexorably east, surrounding Russia. And many times, again, this is not a defense of Russia, it's just a fact. Many times the Russian government under Putin said, whoa, 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 whoa. You are threatening our core national interest, which is not to have other people's missiles on our borders. Back off. And then in 2014, the Obama administration overthrew the government of Ukraine to put an American puppet in there, thereby sealing the fate of nations. When that happened, and Sergei Karganov said it at the time, you have just guaranteed a war in Ukraine that will destroy Ukraine. So as you listen to the interview, and we hope you listen carefully because the English is not flawless and it was done over satellite from Moscow, so it's not the best audio, but it's worth listening. That man that you're going to hear has a long track record of calling events right. And it's not to detract from his powers of perception or his intellect, which is formidable, to say other people could have drawn the same conclusions because it's pretty freaking obvious. If you exclude Russia from NATO, you're probably seeking a war with Russia. And if you try to put nuclear-armed missiles on Russia's border, you're probably going to get a military response. That's exactly what he said. And of course, he was laughed at in Europe, where he'd spent a lot of his life. And he was totally ignored by the United States. And our policymakers were on to this, that, or the other thing. They were not paying any attention at all. And to the extent they were very excited for this war with Russia. And they never really explained why. And then once that war began 4 years ago, they began to act through their proxy, the Ukrainian government under Zelensky, truly a proxy, in a war that has been managed from day one in part by the CIA, our CIA, targeting by the CIA. Anyone who tells you that's not true is lying. They begin to act with not just recklessness, but extreme recklessness, the kind of behavior that suggests you don't care about the consequences at all. You're just all in. Actually, at some point, the kind of behavior that suggests a death wish, that suggests, like, I actually want a nuclear holocaust. I'm happy to risk the lives of my family, my nation, and the world in a nuclear exchange. And we know that because of what they did. They blew up Nord Stream, which was the main source of natural gas for Europe. So that did two things. One, it destroyed the European economy. That was obviously going to happen. And it did. Because you can't have a robust economy, certainly not a manufacturing economy, without cheap energy. Without cheap energy, you're left with what? Real estate and finance. And of course, the people making these decisions are familiar only with real estate and finance because that's the world they live in. But in the real world, countries become rich and powerful and stable and resilient because they make things. So that's the first thing. We blew up Nord Stream. So that destroys our supposedly closest allies in Europe, particularly in Germany. Germans hate themselves so much they won't even admit that we did it, but we did it. Through proxies, but we did it, as we said we would. And the second thing that it did is send a very clear message to Russia, we're done. We're not going to have a kind of Vietnam scenario where we have a proxy war, but, you know, there are limits to our behavior. Yeah, we'll spray Agent Orange, but we're not actually going to, you know, level Hanoi. We bomb it on the edges, but we're, you know, there are limits to what we're going to do because we don't actually want a war with the Soviets. American and NATO behavior since the beginning of this war suggests there are no limits at all. Blowing up Russian infrastructure, trying to assassinate Putin repeatedly. They lie about it, but yes, they have. Yes, they have. The Ukrainian government has tried to assassinate Vladimir Putin multiple times. Has the CIA assisted with the targeting of those drones? Yes, obviously. Tell me how you didn't. No one's even asked them. You don't need to be an economist to see what's happening. The dollar is in trouble. It's getting weaker. It's sad, but we're not in charge of it. Oh, but that's the problem. They don't consider Russia a great power. They're not a great power. You know what Russia is? Russia's a gas station with nuclear weapons. Watch this.
I think economic sanctions are a very important step. Identify these kleptocrats and look, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country.
It is a wounded and declining nation. It has an uncompetitive economy. Senator McCain used to joke that Russia is a gas station pretending to be a country. Its declining population, of course, contributes to its decline.
What's your view of Putin? Look, I think he's got grand ambitions. I think he's hostile to the United States, but I think the thing that we've seen is he doesn't have the conventional capability to realize his ambitions. And so he's basically a gas station with a bunch of nuclear weapons.
If the president could rally the world to push back against Russian aggression and really hit them economically, have sanctions that hit really hard, then Putin is basically a gas station masquerading as a country.
Isn't it amazing how they all use, I mean, even the left that does this, and people make fun of them for having talking points. But for them to repeat the exact same thing over, it's so unoriginal. It's like these guys don't think about this stuff before they do it. But you know, and saying it's a gas station with nuclear weapons, this is essentially saying, you know, you're giving the drunk homeless guy a nuclear weapon to play with. Like, what do you think's going to end up happening? The guy's going to get drunk one day and he's going to shoot it off. You know, and then everybody's going to suffer the consequences of it. It just doesn't make sense. And this is what's crazy about these leaders on the right and the left. They're all just completely unaware.
There's really nothing more embarrassing. And as someone who knows all four of the men you just saw say that, you pause and you think, we are a great nation. This is the United States. We're a great nation. And we should be led, in particular, policies that matter, that could determine whether your children live or die, should be led by great men. Men with wisdom, above all, restraint, a sense of longitudinal interest. It matters what this looks like in 100 years. That should be part of the calculation. and knowledge and lived experience. And none of those four men you just saw, all four of whom have been major players in formulating U.S. foreign policy over many decades, none of them meet any of those criteria. These are weak, unwise, in the case of John McCain, though very charming, I will say, low IQ people. True. That's just true. They don't know anything. So you could say, everything about Russia I find repulsive. Everything about it offends my sensibilities as an American. That's fine. People feel that way. But you can't dismiss it as a gas station with nuclear weapons because that reveals you as ignorant. Because it's the opposite of that, of course. On a cultural level, the country that produced Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, more than a gas station.
Hey, RJ, I think, wasn't there another agreement before Minsk? I think it was in Budapest, maybe. I can't remember what it was. But, yeah, I think there was something else prior to the Minsk agreement. But yeah, this is all brought on by the United States. Yeah, welching on the Minsk agreement.
But it also suggests that you are doing the one thing you can never do with an adversary, and that's underestimate his power and resilience. You have to see the people you're in conflict with clearly, or you will get hurt. That's the real risk here. Not just you'll act like the ugly American, you're a buffoon. They're a gas station with nuclear weapons. What a clever line. I heard that from my donor. I'm going to repeat it on Meet the Press, which is exactly what the poor DeSantis, doesn't know anything, was doing, trying to sound statesman-like. Oh, I just heard this. Well, gas station nuclear weapons. It's so good. You know, you reveal that you're just a rube. Go back to Orlando. But it's more than that. You can watch.
And by the way, yeah, it's funny he says that because I think he endorsed James Fishback for governor of Florida. Not that DeSantis is running, but of course DeSantis is going to back Byron Donalds. So it's kind of interesting. Tucker Carlson is backing James Fishback, which it's kind of good to hear.
Wind up way over your head, and we are now way over our heads because of that attitude. Lindsey Graham, who, to his credit, has been around, he's been everywhere. Lindsey Graham has still not picked up the one quality you hope that travel instills in a person, which is wisdom. Zero. And there's a particularly sad line at the end of the clip you just saw from Lindsey Graham where he said, if just we can make our sanctions tough enough, we just need tough sanctions, and that will bring Russia to its knees. Well, we did that, actually. But who got brought to his knees? Was it Russia? No, it was not. It was us. One of the saddest things this country's ever done is sabotaged its own currency over time. But if you were to isolate a moment where the U.S. dollar's future became dim, it would have to be in the Biden administration's immediate response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was the moment that we kicked Russia out of SWIFT. We just stole the personal property of people who didn't work for the Russian government, the so-called oligarchs, which just means businessmen. Just took their stuff because they had Russian names and prevented Russians from playing in
There's some people
international sporting events. You can't be at Wimbledon. There's an OV at the end of your name or whatever. So we humiliated ourselves, of course, by behaving. Who behaves like that? But we also sabotaged our own core interest, which is the maintenance of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. That's the key thing that we have. It's not our manufacturing base that makes us rich. Sorry. Wish it was. It's the U.S. dollars, the privilege of holding the currency that, say, energy transactions are conducted in. Everyone has to use dollars. It's called the petrodollar. Been there since 1971. You tamper with that, and the bills come due, and you become poor. And then all the downstream effects of poverty, which include violence, by the way, and chaos. That was the single most unwise thing any administration has done in my lifetime, 56 years. That was the dumbest thing. That was the most self-destructive thing. So what was gold trading at? Do you remember? If you got a phone in your hand right now, look it up. What was gold trading at, just say February 1st, 2022? About $1,700 an ounce, which is high, was high. You check gold prices today, the spot price of gold today, it's about $4,600 per ounce. Has the S&P grown that much in 4 years? No. Has anything? No. Why gold? Is there some new industrial application for gold? No. There are some, but not really. People are buying gold as an option to the US dollar. Gold is what you buy when you want out of the dollar because you don't believe it has a bright future. You dump your treasuries and you buy gold. And the people who actually understand the system because they made it and participated in it and are its biggest players are doing that. China is doing that. Now, why in 2026 would you dump treasuries, which they have, a lot of treasuries, and buy gold, the most primitive medium of exchange? Like the Assyrians use gold. Gold? Only superstitious people buy gold. I'm not making the case that there's some inherent quality in gold that makes it valuable. I'm making the case that compared to what? You're doing that because you believe the US dollar is unsafe. And why do you believe that? Because the US government just used it as a political weapon against a great power. That's why. Anybody could have figured this out. And the second thing that happened almost immediately is that Russia formed a durable alliance with China. Now think about this for a second. And Donald Trump, to his great credit, used to say this. The worst thing Biden ever did was drive Russia into an alliance with China. Why is that the worst thing? Because here you have the largest economy in the world, which is China, and you have the largest resource density in the world and the biggest country in the world, which is Russia, combining against you. So I think by anybody's count, there are four really kind of major players in our near to long-term future globally, and they are the U.S., Russia, it's more than a gas station with nuclear weapons, sorry, India, and China. Now, who knows where India is going to land, but if you've got Russia and China against you, it's tough. That's not only not unipolar, that's like an actual threat to your interests. That's an actual threat to your... Don't allow that. The reason Richard Nixon flew to Beijing 50 years ago, 55 years ago, and met with Chairman Mao, who, by the way, was a lot more of a monster than Putin's ever thought of being, was not a Christian, unlike Putin, killed 100 million of his own people. Richard Nixon flew there anyway and, quote, opened up China, made an alliance with China. Why? To split it from Russia. Because he understood that was the threat. The bloc, the alliance of countries that don't share our interest, is a massive threat to us and to the dollar. He did that, and it worked for like 50 years. Until Joe Biden, with the help of the U.S. Congress, probably the largest collection of unwise cowards in the English-speaking world, got together and decided that they could levy sanctions against this country, which they deemed bad for reasons they never really explained, except Russia reacted to their provocations and went over a border that no one can find on a map. Because of that, we needed to act and do something because we're Winston Churchill, not Neville Chamberlain, and everything's about World War II, and we need to stop Russian aggression. By the way, we were on Russia's side during World War II, but shut up, you're not supposed to know that. And we're going to punish them, not by actually joining the Ukrainian military and putting our lives on the line because, hey, we've got better things to do than go die in someone else's war, but we're going to sanction them, very tough sanctions. Despite the living proof that not only do sanctions not work, they are counterproductive to the stated aims. And if that's untrue, what happened in Cuba exactly, which got sanctioned in about 1960? Oh, Raul Castro is still alive and still has power in that country. The country's gotten poorer. Don't think Raul Castro has. They don't work. They have the opposite effect. And by the way, they are dishonorable and feline. They're a weak man's form of diplomacy. When Lindsey Graham is running around pretending to be tough, the man with the size 5 shoe is telling you he's the man on the scene, you know what you're watching is pantomime. It's acting. You're watching a weak man pose as a strong man. And the decisions that he makes reflect that. That's why they all love sanctions.
All right, I'm going to pause here for a second and see what's going on with the protests here. lot of activity out in front of that federal building.
Can you hear me? Why are you violating our rights? I'll make a 50 before his
So open all borders. That's what they want. All right, I'm going to call it a night. It's getting late, and I will be back tomorrow. So all of you that are here, please be sure to subscribe so you get notified when I go live again. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for Kip, RJ, Full Metal Chad, Tom, Alan, Daniel, everybody that came in. Be sure you subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.